Okay, thank you. Now, some of you, I know, are very familiar with the idea of cryonics, but I suspect there's probably a fair number of people at this kind of conference who don't have much idea of what it is. It's that it's probably something to do with chilly things from the word, and don't know much more about it than that. So what I want to do is explain to those people primarily what the relevance of cryonics is to an organization doing advancing rejuvenation technologies. Now, the basic idea of cryonics, probably most of you, almost all of you, I suspect, know the very basic idea, which is cryonics is the preservation at very low temperatures of human beings immediately after legal death, at least in the current legal system, in the hope that more advanced technologies in the future can repair whatever killed them that current medical technologies are unable to reverse, and preferably also wait until you can cure things like little problems like aging itself. So the more formal term is cryopreservation, or reversible solid-state suspended animation. And the current preferred way of doing that, as I'll explain very briefly later, is vitrification. So it's not really freezing. People like to call cryonics freezing. It really isn't, strictly speaking. So I see cryonics really as part of a portfolio of anti-aging approaches. After all the stuff we've been hearing about here, we know a lot of these things are in the very early stages. And we're very hopeful they're going to move fast enough to prevent us from getting too old and dying. But we shouldn't be too confident about that. That's not necessarily going to happen. I know 30 years ago, I was pretty confident that by now we'd have fixed a large part of the problem, yet really we haven't made very large advances in that time. So I'd rather have a backup option. If we don't make it, this is something that, that might help. It's a last resort, if you like. There's various other kinds of relationships between cryonics and rejuvenative medicine. Cryonics will require regenerative medicine because if we're successful in cryopreserving someone in excellent conditions, like we're preserving the information critical, the identity critical information in the brain, then at some point we're going to have to bring the person back, and that's going to require rejuvenating the body. Because a lot of cryonics patients, first of all, are in very bad shape when they die. They may be very old. They may have multiple problems. They may have problems with their brain. Probably many of their organs are not in good shape. And so if you're going to bring them back, obviously you're going to need to regenerate those organs. And perhaps most difficult and most crucial, the brain itself. So it's going to very much rely on the kinds of technologies which the SENS Foundation is working on. So why do you need it? Why should you guys in particular be interested in cryonics? We've got Aubrey's idea of longevity escape velocity. At a certain point, we're going to advance fast enough that we're starting to achieve an extension of 3 months per year and 6 months per year. And eventually, every year, we'll extend lifespan by 1 year. At that point, we've achieved LEV. We can keep extending that indefinitely and hopefully accelerate that further. But are you sure you're going to make it to that point? When is that point going to be? We each have a different estimate of that. Mine tends to be a little bit more pessimistic these days than it used to be. So you may not live long enough. You might have an accident, even if you keep yourself in great health. Just about 5 weeks ago, I totaled my car on the freeway. I was very lucky. Thank you, engineers, for creating such things as airbags. Otherwise, I wouldn't be healthy and happy here today. So that can happen any time. Natural disasters, homicide, no matter how good the research is, no matter how well you take care of your health, that could happen. And what about currently incurable diseases? No matter how well you're doing in terms of general health, no matter how much we're making progress in life extension technologies and regenerative medicine, you could still catch some horrible disease that's going to finish you off. So one way to think about cryonics is that, okay, right now, if something happens to you after this talk, you get so excited by what I've said that you have a heart attack. What happens? Well, we don't probably have the means to do much about it here. There might be some defibrillation device or something, but mostly what we're going to do is we're going to call an ambulance and have you taken across space, across Cambridge somewhere, to some other space where they have more advanced technology, better medical technology, and a team will go into action and do something for you. Cryonics is kind of like that, except that what we do is we take you through time rather than space, also to a place with more advanced medical technology. More advanced technology than we have anywhere in the world today. And an important part of that idea is that, as I said, a non-essential part of cryonics, except that it's legally required right now, is that you have to be legally dead before we can do anything. Otherwise, you get in big trouble. That maybe is not optimal and shouldn't be the case, but it is. So what that means is that right now we take cases where people really cannot be helped. They're declared legally or clinically dead, which of course is not biologically dead, In fact, someone who's clinically dead, really what that is a doctor saying, this person we can't do anything for, or we can do very little. We could maybe actually bring this person back to life for a few minutes or a few hours, but we're going to no-code them. We're saying it's not worth it. They're just going to be suffering and miserable, and they're going to die again. So the point at which we say someone is dead is actually a fairly arbitrary thing. It's historically variable. People who died 50 years ago or 100 years ago are people who, in the same conditions today, we could often bring those back. We can jump on them, do CPR, administer various drugs. There's all kinds of ways of bringing people back. We know that there are actual cases of, especially children it tends to be, who've drowned in cold water and who've been clinically dead for hours, and yet they've been revived and have suffered no brain damage. They've actually been quite recoverable. So there's no such thing as a point of death, unless, of course, it's you're sitting next to a nuclear bomb and you're completely exploded in a fraction of a second. Then we can say there is a point of death. But for most of it, it's more of a spectrum. So, so legal death, clinical death are not true death. What is true death? Well, that's kind of a complex issue, right? There's a lot of debates about brain death and the neocortical criterion and which parts of your brain really have to go before you can turn off a machine. And actually, I've written a whole chapter of my PhD dissertation on that question. To me, the basic idea is that true death, you're not really absolutely dead and gone until your brain has decayed to such an extent that no possible technology could possibly infer the state of your brain and repair it. So we're assuming, this is really kind of an in-principle view of death, that if we can't fix your brain now, but we can keep it in good condition so it doesn't deteriorate further, and in the future it might be possible to infer the condition of the brain, to restore those membranes which today we can't repair, then you're not really dead. You're in some kind of other state. You're obviously not alive. A cryopreserved patient in a vat of liquid nitrogen is not alive, but they're not really dead in the final sense. Maybe they're dead in the sense that your car is dead on the freeway or your battery dies out, but you get the battery recharged, you take the car to the shop, and you get it working again. So, if your car stops working, you say, oh, my car died. It doesn't mean you're going to go bury it or cremate it. You're going to fix it instead. So I think of cryonics patients as in a third state in between. We can call that biostasis, various other terms we can use. What it essentially means is they're not functioning, they're non-functional, they're not alive, but they're not decaying. They haven't reached that point of dissolution where the critical information that makes them who they are has disappeared. And that's really the purpose of cryonics, is to get to people as quick as possible, to preserve them as well as possible without doing any further damage or minimal further damage, and keep them in that condition for as long as possible. Let's see. So we have to thank, I think it's James Dewar, I think the Scottish fellow who invented, for purposes of making liquor, invented the Dewar. This is one of the ones that we use at Alcor. These are very tall Dewars that contain 4 whole body patients or numerous neuro patients, something I'll get to in a minute. That's the way we currently have a go at the third state. There are other possible ways. There are possibilities of chemical fixation, for instance. There's actually a prize being offered for improving the process of chemically preserving the brain. That's another possible method. I don't think it's really works as well as what we do right now, but that's another possibility. Some people think that perhaps, Ray Kurzweil has been mentioned. He's very keen on the idea of scanning the brain with advanced scanning technologies at such a deep level that we could essentially create a file of your mind, and then if something happens to you, maybe at some point in the far future, certainly farther than we're talking about, maybe you could reinstantiate the program that represents that information and bring you back in some other form. Now that possibility is a lot further away, I think, than even reviving cryonics patients, let alone the kinds of things you've been hearing more about. So how does it work? For those who aren't very familiar with the process, there's really a few basic steps. There's a lot of details to each one of them. The basic process starts with deployment and stabilization, deployment and standby. We're going to stabilizing the patient, cryoprotect and perfusion, and cryogenic cool down. So the first step of that, this can vary a lot depending on the particular circumstances, but in an ideal case, someone's already a member of the organization, the Alcor Foundation or of Ben Best's Cryonics Institute, and hopefully we will get some warning that the patient is dying. That happens fairly often, and we try to monitor patients who are critical. And then we send out a standby team, which should be at least 4 people preferably, and they sit there and they wait and they watch, monitor vital signs. And as soon as the patient's being declared legally dead, again, it's required by law right now, they will go into action within 30 seconds and start administering various medications to reduce the damage done by the process of as the metabolism breaks down and as the cooling process itself. So we do that as quick as possible, and that's, getting that first part done is crucial. It's the stabilization process. We want to start cooling you down as fast as we can. That first 10 degrees is critical. Let's get the person down towards the freezing point of water as quick as we can. So the longer you are at room temperature, obviously the worse the problem. So there's various ways of doing that. We restore circulation. And there's some possible new methods. Ventilating the lungs with liquid may actually accelerate that process. But by restarting circulation, the point is not resuscitation in this case. We don't want to resuscitate the patient. What we want to do is to, first of all, restore circulation of oxygenated blood to the brain. To circulate the medications, we're adding about 16 current medications in our list. And unless you've got circulation going, those aren't going to get very far. And also by restoring that circulation, you're improving the rate of cooling. Again, that's critical. Now, ideally, when we go somewhere else to do a remote stabilization, some of them are done actually locally. If we have people who know they're in trouble, they may come to a hospice in Scottsdale, Phoenix area, and so they're very nearby. But in most cases, we have to go somewhere else in the country or even possibly abroad. Ideally, what we want to do is replace the blood with an organ preservation solution. So these have been researched, obviously, for organ storage, kidneys and various other organs, and we use something very similar to that kind of solution. This enhances the cooling rate, prevents the blood clotting, and prevents against cold ischemia. Where are we here? Okay. So the next stage is cryoprotectant perfusion. So we'll do a remote washout of the blood. You want to get as much of the body water out as possible because we don't want that crystallizing and forming crystals, damaging the cell membranes. When we get the patient to the Alcor facility, we'll then do cryoprotectant perfusion. This is the current formula, preferred formula. This is essentially what we do now. I mentioned that we don't really freeze anymore. What we do is vitrify patients. In the last about 10 years or so, this has become the standard procedure. It involves introducing a higher concentration of cryoprotectant. And so instead of freezing, what it does is it gradually gets thicker and thicker, more and more viscous, and forms essentially a glass-like substance. And that therefore doesn't cause minimal damage from ice crystal formation. You can't entirely remove all of it. That's not really easy to do, but you can do an awful lot of that. So it greatly reduces the problem. So those cryobiologists who don't really know about cryonics or don't really want to will often say it's like you're smashing the cells up and ice crystals are destroying everything. That's not really true, and we can see from studies that's not really the way it works. There's an example of, this is just basic frozen tissue. This is vitrified tissue. There's a huge difference in quality. You can do electron microscope studies of these tissues, and you can see we're preserving things pretty damn well. And from what we know of how the brain works, if you're interested in storing, preserving memories and personality, then we know it's got something to do with the structure of the neurons and the synapses, various theories about long-term potentiation. Those kinds of things are preserved by vitrification. They're preserved really very well. So yes, there's a massive problem to be solved in bringing these patients back to a functioning condition, but it seems like all the essential information, at least in good conditions, is preserved. Now, it's not always good conditions. Sometimes we don't even know until sometime after whether a patient has become legally dead. It may be hard to even move them. If it's suspicious circumstances, there may be autopsy. That's very bad news. Even in those cases, we can sometimes persuade them to limit the autopsy or do a virtual autopsy through scanning. It's very hard to say when the damage is too much, and that's really up to the patient, the member, to specify whether to go ahead or not. So the cryogenic cool down, essentially what we're doing, we end up gradually over a period of time. It takes several days because we take the patient down to about minus 110 degrees to begin with and leave them there for a little while because we don't want to have unnecessary cracking events. With a large complex thing like a person rather than a single piece of tissue or even a whole organ, if you cool down too quickly, things may shrink at different rates and you may get cracking. Now, that may not be a big problem in the long term. We're kind of taking a conservative approach. After all, if we're going to go in and repair individual neurons and other body cells and membranes by the trillions, then maybe large-scale macro cracks may not be that big a deal. It may be fairly easy to solve. But obviously, it's not good practice to just shrug and say, oh, let's not bother. Science will solve that in the future. What we're trying to do is prevent the damage as much as possible in the present to reduce the burden on future technologies. We may think that technology will solve everything in the future, but let's reduce that burden. Plus, we don't want people to be cryopreserved unnecessarily long, because even if the science works out, there are obviously risks that it'll be made illegal or be attacked, or there'll be some natural disaster, or the organization will fail financially. The longer it has to go on, obviously, the higher the risk. So you don't want to rely on the future for everything. You've got to do your best right now. Okay. So let me see. I can't spend too much time talking about Alcor, given the limited time, but basically, this is what we do: preservation of individual lives to be sought through the following list of fundamentals. So our first priority is really to maintain patients who are cryopreserved. That's our core goal. Get them cryopreserved under the best conditions we can with the best technology available today, to keep improving those technologies, to improve the cryoprotection solution, to improve the way we do the standbys and the transports, and to be very conservative about our finances and our organization so that we're here for the long term. Now, the Alcor Life Extension Foundation has been around for 39 years so far, so we're not doing too bad on the longevity front for an organization. We expect to have to be around a lot longer than that. And part of the mission, of course, is eventually to restore our patients to health and reintegrate them into society. And you might say, well, how on earth are you going to do that? Why would anybody bother? Well, part of the way it works is that most people who fund their cryopreservation use a life insurance policy. It's usually the best way to do it. There are other ways of doing that. But however it's done, a big chunk of the money that the organization is given upon the patients being declared legally dead is put into the Patient Care Trust Fund, which I think I've mentioned here. The Patient Care Trust Fund is a legally separate entity, so that if we're ever attacked by a lawsuit or government or something like that, then that large sum of money which keeps the patients cryopreserved is legally separate and will still survive. So most of the money that's paid goes into that fund, and we don't touch the capital ever. All we use is the interest from that fund to pay for the upkeep for liquid nitrogen, for every so often replacing the dewars, which actually should last several decades, I think, each, and other direct costs of patient care. And eventually, that money should then stay there, the bulk, the capital should remain intact, and in fact should grow over time, over compound interest. Even if it's a rather low rate, if it takes decades, that should gradually grow. So if it does become possible, and we don't know for sure that it will, but if it does become possible at some point in the future to restore cryopreserved patients, then that money is available exactly to do that, to fund that research, to do the process. In addition, members can actually arrange their own trust fund. We have a model trust, which is recently released. It went through 17 iterations, I think, before finally being finalized. And it's a pretty low-cost fund. You don't have to be a millionaire to use it, although it's nice if you are. But it's a fund that allows you to actually appoint trustees who will keep that money for your personal benefit. Because the Patient Care Trust Fund is a pool. It's for everybody. But you can put money aside directly, which actually you can fairly well guarantee will be used to help you come back, if it is possible. If you come back in 75 or 100 years, that money will be available for you. So you won't come back as a pauper. You'll have something to start with. So we have a bunch of regional teams. We have kits deployed around the country so that we can fly out there very quickly and don't necessarily have to bring things with us and go into action as fast as we can. We have arrangements with other organizations. We work with Suspended Animation, a Florida-based company who has a quite extensive network of professional surgeons and perfusionists, and so we can draw upon those to augment our own capabilities. And I think the way we're moving is increasingly towards making cryonics part of mainstream medicine. That's really the goal. One day we would like to not to have to do these things ourselves. We would like to have people in hospitals who are trained to do this and who are ready to do it and see it as the normal part of medicine. It's not a burial practice, it's a medical practice. And obviously it's going to take a long time before that's accepted. But already we're seeing a little bit of crossover. We're seeing the use of low temperature medicine. We're seeing people essentially doing surgery at very low temperatures, especially brain surgery, doing very similar processes to what we do at the beginning, washing out as much blood and body fluids as possible, replacing them with a solution that protects against damage. Then they do the brain surgery, and then they replace those fluids, and the person comes back to life. So they've essentially been clinically dead for a few hours. They've been on support systems just like we use, and then they come back. So that's pretty familiar already. There are also organ donation centers who are starting to actually administer medications before legal death. So we're very interested in seeing if we can pursue that course. Maybe we can allow it to do certain kinds of medication that aren't going to do any harm, but actually help to preserve you. So when as soon as you pass the point of clinical death, we'll already have administered some medications. So as I mentioned, we're very fiscally conservative. We try to never touch the capital, always to protect that money. Some of the advances we've made, obviously a big thing is patient security. If people are going to be in this building for decades, then we have to protect them as well as we can, given our limited resources. So we're continually trying to improve things, improve our RV and ambulance, improve the training, expand our network of people who can do the process. I won't go over all this stuff, but recently redesigned a portable ice bath and use a squid so that when the patient who's recently been declared legally dead, after administering medications, they can be put into the ice bath, and the squid is a device which circulates the chilly fluid around them that accelerates the cooling rate, which is that critical part at the beginning. Okay. So essentially the message for this audience is that maybe life extension technologies will come along fast enough, maybe rejuvenative medicine will work out fast enough, but how sure are you of that? When you get into your car, you may say, well, I'm going to drive carefully, and I'm not going to do anything reckless, but you still put your seatbelt on, and you probably also try to buy a car with airbags. So that's really what cryonics is. It's a backup option. It may seem non-conventional. A lot of people don't want to do it because they don't understand it. It's not traditional. They're afraid of what their friends might think if they do this. There's all kinds of objections why it hasn't really caught on. It's really a very small practice. There are only a couple of thousand people in the world who've made these arrangements. And there are probably no more than 250 people who've ever been cryopreserved. Yet I would argue that it's an evidence-based practice. It's not unreasonable. Of course, it relies on technology advancing, but I think everybody here realizes that's quite a plausible view to have. And again, we don't rely just completely on the future. We do everything we can to improve the practice right now, to minimize the damage. And so really, I think of this as very conservative medicine. It might sound odd that cryonics is conservative, but in the most literal sense, what we're doing is conserving people. Instead of saying, well, this person stopped functioning, let's throw them on the fire or stick them in the ground and let microbes eat them, we don't do that. We say, let's not give up on this person. Let's realize that we're just in a very temporary stage in history. Technology advances. People who died 50 years ago wouldn't necessarily have died under those circumstances today. Let's take the big picture. Let's keep this person in the best possible condition, unchanging if we can, and minimize the damage we're going to do in the process, and let the future have a go at them. So I will be happy to take a few questions. By the way, any questions about cryoprotection you might want to hold for Ben's talk, because he'll be going to the technical details of cryoprotectants.
So I have just a logistic question for you. Given that there's a lot of risk involved in cryoprotection, admittedly, you're sacrificing whatever days are left of normal life for a chance at recovery. But why would one choose cryoprotection? What are the benefits of choosing cryoprotection over a hydrogen sulfide temperature reduction to a stage at which nothing's frozen, no damage is done, recovery has been demonstrated at least in animal systems? I mean, I'm just curious why there hasn't been more exploration of the refrigeration alternative rather than the freezing.
I'm not sure what
you don't have to worry so much about the power going out because
okay, well, let me address that, because that's a misconception that seems to come up all the time.
That's just a joke.
We don't, well, no, it's worth addressing because it is a common misconception. It doesn't actually require electrical power at all. It'd be a very bad idea. Over the decades, you're bound to get power cuts. I didn't really go into the details of that, but the large dewar I showed, about once a week we have the air liquide comes up and they top off those dewars with liquid nitrogen, and it's allowed to boil off very slowly. Our best dewars, the new ones, have about 8 liters a day boil off. And we have a bulk tank, so they fill up the bulk tank, and then from there we fill all the dewars. And so if the power goes out, it doesn't make any difference. It means our alarm systems will be off, but we can still do the fills. And in fact, we don't have to refill those except we can actually go for a couple of months without a problem if there's a huge disruption in supply.
Okay, you've answered the joke, but what about the question?
Okay. Well, the first part of your question, it seemed to be mistaken. You're suggesting that you're giving up the last few days of your life to have this process?
Forget that. Okay, the question are we at a point where it would make sense to explore refrigeration as lowering body temperature to just above 0 centigrade by hydrogen sulfide, which appears to be working?
Well, if you're just going to go down to regular refrigeration temperatures, that's not going to do the job because biological processes will still continue, decay will still continue. You really have to get down to something like minus 110 or below. Otherwise, you can show it's just you're going to go bad after a period of time. At minus 196 degrees C, you're going to stay pretty much exactly the same for centuries, except for a tiny bit of cosmic ray damage maybe. There's nothing much happening.
Okay,
But at minus 10, minus 20, no, that's not, we can show easily, that's not good enough.
You're going to need a lot longer time to figure out how to recover these people. So,
Maybe a question from the back?
Yeah. So I've actually considered Alcor or Cryonics, but I've always wondered whether or not my memories would actually stay intact so that no matter if you could freeze the brain, you might not actually be able to keep the synapses in place. And of course, it's a better option than being in the ground or rotting over here. But if it's so one thing I'd like to see done is the demonstration that the long-term potentiation that you were referring to is actually preserved. And I think that can be done in vitro, potentially in small neural cultures that are trained and just frozen and then, or vitrified, and then demonstrate that that long-term potentiation is maintained when they're actually restored. So, and I think an awful lot of people would consider that as very interesting proof that brain function could be preserved once the cryoprotectant and all these other problems are actually done. But I want to feel pretty confident that my neural synapses are going to be intact.
Yeah, I think there should be a lot more studies of that. I mean, unfortunately, we don't have the resources to fund a lot of that kind of research, but I'd like to see a lot more of that. We draw a lot upon the organ preservation work. The cryoprotectants we use are based on that research, but there's not a whole lot of interest in cryoprotecting brains and then restoring them and seeing what activity you get. So that would be a very good research to do, and if we get more resources, I would like to do that, for sure. But what we do have is the electron microscope studies, which is fairly convincing that we're preserving things, if we do it right, we're preserving things pretty well. And based on what we do know of memory so far, which is obviously not complete, it looks fairly promising. But again, there are no guarantees. We like to emphasize that we can't be sure this is going to work. It's just, when you go into the operating room in an emergency, you can't be sure it will work either. And we don't know if our odds are better or worse than that, but it seems to be worth trying.
Absolutely.
What is the largest animal that has ever been frozen and brought back to life, and how long for?
You really can't do that with any animal of any size. I mean, there's all kinds of tissues and cell types that have been cryopreserved at liquid nitrogen. There are people walking around, actually, who have been cryopreserved in the form of eggs and sperm that have been banked and then implanted. So you can do individual cells. You can't really even do whole organs yet. That's really the holy grail right now. There has been one case of a kidney that was cryopreserved and vitrified with exactly the same process, and apparently was functional. But that needs to be duplicated and done with other organs. So really, with a whole organism, it gets more difficult, and that's a big problem. That's one reason why there aren't more people signed up for this, because we don't have proof right now. What we have is the best we can do right now, and relying on advances in the future. We can't actually show that we brought back an animal, even at this point.
Max, you can freeze worms, which are 960 cells, in all tissue.
Okay.
Bring them back for like years after you frozen.
Okay. Yeah, so people don't get very excited about worms, unfortunately.
Right,
sort of,
just over here at the back.
Back here.
Just there, yeah. So how much does it cost to actually get a body frozen? And then how much does it cost per year to keep that body?
Well, there's two costs, and it varies depending on the organization. Ben will give you a different set of prices. Alcor is a higher price because we tend to use more technology and more resources. But for our prices, there's two costs. There's the membership cost, which is currently $620 a year, and then there's an additional $180 for a fund we use, which is essentially by paying into that fund, it guarantees that we will come and tend to you no matter where you are. If you have to fly across country, we'll take a team across country. So that's part of the cost. For the cryopreservation itself, for a whole body cryopreservation, it's $200,000 minimum. We recommend higher levels, that's just the current minimum. And for a neuropreservation only, where we just preserve the brain, the idea being that any kind of technology that could bring that person back to life should be able to regenerate the body relatively easily. That's going to be an easier problem. For that, it's $80,000 minimum. And again, a large chunk of that payment goes into the patient care trust fund for long-term upkeep and care. So it's really ludicrously cheap if you think about the cost of open heart surgery or any kind of medical procedure, which is just done over a few hours. So pretty good value for money, I think.
What's the minimum fund size?
Sorry?
Minimum fund size.
For, I'm not sure what you mean, which fund?
You have to have this trust fund. What's the minimum size of that fund?
Well, there isn't a minimum size. It's just that the fund, every time someone's cryopreserved and the payment is made, it's added to the patient care trust fund. So there's no... Oh, that goes into the fund from each case. Well, again, it varies depending on... We have many members, unfortunately, who are underfunded because we had lower rates in the past and people didn't plan ahead. So it depends on how much they've provided. But I think about a whole body case, I think it's 70,000 that goes into the patient care trust fund, and for a neuro, it's somewhat less than that, 35, 40,000, I think. So some of it's used for the initial process of doing the stabilization, the standby, and some of it, large chunk, goes into the patient care trust fund. But that does vary. We put as much as we can into that. And then, of course, we get bequests every so often where people will say, if I die and have extra money, you can put this into research or into the patient care trust fund, or they can specify other uses.
So what research do you know of that's being done to figure out how to bring these people back, or animals back, any type of animal? What work's being done to figure that out?
Well, there's no real direct work on bringing human beings back. Again, that's not really popular enough, but there's a considerable amount of work on bringing organs back from cryopreservation. That would be an enormous boon, because right now you have to try and match up organs across the country and deliver them very quickly. So if you could cryopreserve organs and keep them for months, just organ bank them, and then thaw them as needed, that would be very useful. So there's a lot of research going into that area. But most cryobiologists don't really want to be associated with cryonics because it's not part of their mainstream. And so there's very little discussion of actually trying to do work with the kind of things that we're doing. And also we know it's very unlikely that, given our current level of technology and knowledge, that we could ever do that right now. It's going to require a lot more advances before we'd even want to attempt that. It would be a waste of animals' lives to try and do that kind of testing right now.
Okay, so we're going to move on to the next talk. Ben Best from